Hi guys, welcome back. Today's video is on modals. This is part 1 in a series of 3 videos on modals. In today's lesson, we'll focus on just introducing what modals are. We'll talk about phrasal modals and basic rules that go with them. We'll also talk about formation and word order when we're forming statements or questions. And we'll finish it off by doing a quick quiz or worksheet just to confirm what we go over today. So first and foremost, what are modals, right? We have 9 in English. They are can, could, may, might, must, shall, should, will, and would. They are auxiliary verbs or helping verbs. So they're basically not the main verbs in the sentence. Phrasal modals are very similar to modals, except that they are phrases, right? So they're just more than one word. Some of them are be able to, be going to, ought to, be supposed to, be allowed to, have got to, and had better. The list you see on this page is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some scenarios where you would use modals. And it's when we want to express necessity, give advice, give or ask for permission, to express possibility, probability, obligation, or ability. There are some modals and phrasal modals that are very similar. For example, when we use the modal will to express intention or promise, we can also use the phrasal modal be going to instead to express the same thing. For example, I'll finish it on time is the same thing if I say I'm going to finish it on time. On the second row, it says we use the modals could and should to give advice. On the right, it says you can also use the phrasal modals ought to, had better, or be supposed to express very similar things. The modal will and the phrasal modal be going to both talk about future events. Now there is a slight difference between will and be going to, and we'll talk about the difference in a future video, probably part 2 of this modal series. But anyway, both talk about future events. But this phrasal modal be about to, even though it does talk about a future event, it talks about the immediate future. So if I say the store is about to close, I'm saying that the store is going to close in a few minutes, right? So there's a slight difference between be going to and be about to. The next row, it says must, is used to express necessity, obligation, or prohibition. On the right side, it says we can also use the phrasal modals have to or have got to express very similar things. The modals can and could can be used to express ability, and we can also use the phrasal modal be able to express the same thing. For example, my father can speak Spanish fluently, or my father is able to speak Spanish fluently. On the last row, it says may and can be used for permission. And on the right side, it says we can also use the phrasal modal be allowed to express the same thing. Now let's go over some basic rules with modals. So rule number 1 is that they cannot be used alone. So we're not allowed to say Mary can English. We have to have another verb that comes after the modal. So again, you're not allowed to say John might angry. We need another verb that comes after the modal, like John might be angry. Rule number 2, modals do not take the final S. For example, we're not allowed to say Mary can speak Spanish. We can only say Mary can speak Spanish. And of course, this goes for the other 8 modals. We're not going to add an S to any of the 9 modals in English. Rule number 3, the simple or base form of the verb comes right after the modal. So for example, we cannot use an infinitive after a modal, like Mary can to speak Spanish. We would just have to say speak. 3 says no third person singular S, so we cannot say Mary can speaks Spanish. It would just be speak again. And no past tense, Mary can spoke Spanish. And then last one, we cannot use a progressive tense. So Mary can speaking English does not work. So again, we're not allowed to use any other verb after a modal unless it's the base form. So, for example, Mary can speak Spanish. It will happen. Students must arrive on time. And I couldn't see well last night. Rule number 4. You cannot use multiple modals next to each other. For example, we cannot say, she will, can help you tomorrow. We can't have two modals next to each other. So a way to fix that would be you would just choose one modal. For example, she will help you tomorrow, or she can help you tomorrow. However, if you don't like that option, another thing you can do is you can use a modal with multiple phrasal modals. So the rule here is that you're just not allowed to use two modals next to each other, but you are allowed to use a modal next to a phrasal modal. For example, she will be able to help you tomorrow. Can and be able to express the same thing, right? So we're going to just switch out can with the phrasal modal be able to. If you look at the bottom example, it says you must come early to help. That's really hard to understand, right? So again, I'm going to change must to a phrasal modal. It becomes you might have to come early to help. When we use negation, we're just going to add the word not after the modal. So on the left, we have the list could not, might not, may not, should not, shall not, must not, will not, and would not. If you look to the right, it says the only exception is with the word can. When we negate the word can, it actually becomes one word. There's no space in between cannot. And this is the same thing as can't when we use contraction. If you choose to say cannot separated, if you write it separated, it's not wrong, but it doesn't mean the same thing as can't. I'm not going to talk about the difference between these two cannots in this video. There is another video where I do discuss this, and I will link that below. But when you're trying to say can't, it is cannot as one word. Now let's talk about formation or word order when we're making statements using modals. So it's going to be subject, modal or phrasal modal, the base form of the verb, and then the rest of the sentence. For example, subject she, the modal can, the verb speak, and then the rest of the sentence. When we create yes or no questions, we're going to start with the modal, subject, an auxiliary verb if you have any, and then the main verb and the rest of the sentence. For example, may, modal, I, subject. In this sentence, there is no auxiliary verb. The main verb is borrow, and then these books. So may I borrow these books? If you look at the bottom sentence, the modal is will, the subject is Mary. We do have another helping verb, which is a phrasal modal in this case, be able to. The main verb is come, and then the rest of the sentence. Will Mary be able to come to the party? For a WH question, we're always going to start with the WH word, an auxiliary verb, in our case it's going to be a modal for this video, and then the subject, other auxiliary verbs if there are any, the base form of the verb, and then the rest of the sentence. So let's look at the second example. It says the WH word is when, the modal is will, the subject is the students, and then we have another auxiliary verb. Again, it's a phrasal modal in this case, be able to, and then the verb is take a break. When will the students be able to take a break? Let's take a few minutes to correct the errors in the following 6 sentences, all related to modals. Number 1, she should call the manager in the morning. 2, if they study, they might to do better on the next test. 3, my parents cannot speak English fluently. 4, I think the manager should try harder to understand their employees. 5, when do I should call the office? 6, that decision might not is the right one for you. Please pause this video for more time. Okay, let's correct it together. Number 1, she should call the manager in the morning. After a modal, we are going to always have the base form, so it's going to be call. She should call the manager in the morning. Number 2, if they study, they might to do better on the next test. We also said that after the modal, we're not going to have an infinitive, so it will become they might do better on the next test. 3, my parents cannot speak English fluently. Right here, the cannot be separated. It should be one word. 4 says, I think the managers should trying. Again, after the modal, we're going to have the base form, only try. 5, when do I should call the office? So it's when should I call the office? It's going to be WH word, modal, and subject. When should I? Number 6, that decision might not is the right one for you. So that decision might not be. Is a form of the verb be, but after the modal might, we have to have the base form of the verb, which is be. I hope you guys got that all correctly. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found that video helpful. And if you did, please consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video. And please stay tuned for parts 2 and 3 of this series on modals. I'll see you guys next week.